The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, everybody, we're just going to wait another minute or two before we get started to let a couple more people get on. If you're having any tech problems, you can text me or Mickey, or you can email us and we'll try to be paying attention to that. Excuse me. Let me get it. All right. Well, we'll get started at least with the introductions. Hold on one more second, guys. Let me look at one more thing. Okay. All right. So I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. I'm Leanne Huang, and I'm the project director for the Doris Duke Fellowships Program. We're excited to be able to offer another round of Research to Action grant funding. Thanks to the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation for that funding. Before we get started, I just want to let you know everyone is muted. We're going to keep everyone muted just to make sure that we can make it through all the information. If you have problems, reach out to Mickey or to me. You can chat, or you can text us or send us an email. And then wanted to let everyone know we're recording this, or I think we are anyway. It is being recorded, so we can post it to folks later. All right, okay, here is the agenda. First, I'm going to go through the just the general information about the Research to Action grants, the goals, eligibility criteria, expectations for your participation. The second section, I'll talk about writing the proposal. And talk about the narrative, the budget, which I'm really not going to talk about. Joni Perlman will be talking about that from Chapin Hall. And then I'll talk about the letters of support that we require. Then, like I said, Joni will talk about the budget template, which we have posted on the website already. She'll go over that in the instructions and try to give you some helpful hints about how to get that done. Then we are very excited to have Judith Scott and Natalia Orendane. They're going to talk about lessons from the pilot round and share how they came up with their idea, some of their lessons learned, tips for how to write the proposal. We plan to leave plenty of time for questions and answers. So as we're going through this, make sure that you type your questions into the question box, and we will go over those at the end. Okay. Hold on one second. All right. So now we're going to talk about the goals of the program. Sorry, let me move my papers over. I'm trying to go through this really quickly. There's a lot of information. Remember, the project overview and the proposal requirements are on the website. So they will provide a lot more detail than what I will go over here. But I wanted to try to make sure we hit all the highlights. So I'm going to go kind of fast. The goals are the same as they were in the pilot round. Provide support, direct support for applied research. Translate and disseminate research to a broader audience, not just an academic audience. We want to center diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and show support people's efforts to center those in their research. And then the last one is to develop fellow skills in project management and all those things I just mentioned: applied research, diversity, equity, inclusion, translation, and dissemination. All right. The award parameters. This is just sort of the big picture information. We'll award up to 3 grants in round 1, just like we did in the pilot. They're $80,000 maximum. The grant period is 15 months this time, so that's a change. They were 12 months last time. However, the key here is that we expect all of the research to be completed in 12 months, and the last 3 months will be spent only on dissemination, translation and dissemination. So writing and disseminating are in that last 3 months. So when you're writing your proposal, keep that in mind. The analysis should be done within 12 months. Yeah, I just talked about that. And projects should be clear in your proposal how you are focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice in your projects with your project team. And in your priority and in the populations that you're looking at or the research you're doing. We're going to talk about that in just a minute when I get to the eligibility criteria. So let me go here. So this is the eligibility criteria around your project team. So the same, at least two fellows involved. They can be from any cohort, and they should be from different disciplines. The project needs to involve the active participation of a non-research stakeholder, so a policy or practice partner. One thing that we want to emphasize is in your projects, the partners should be engaged in substantive activities throughout the grant period. So we do not want to see projects where, the fellows do all the work and then the very last month you have a meeting and you share the findings. That's not how we're framing a partnership. So you need to clearly articulate the tasks that they will be involved in throughout the project. This is really important if this is a new partnership. So if you haven't worked together before, it's important that you explain how they will be involved throughout. Examples can be like, regular project meetings, providing feedback on data collection processes or protocols, working with you to interpret findings, helping you recruit research subjects. There are lots of possibilities for those tasks, but those should be clear in the proposal. You should propose a clear staff and project management plan, and you'll see more about that in the narrative, the requirements for the narrative, but talking about budget monitoring, team meetings, staff supervision, those types of activities should be in your proposal. And then a junior scholar, we strongly encourage you to include a junior scholar. We would like for them to be from either from one of the fellows institutions. It doesn't necessarily have to be the PI's institution, but it should be somebody who is at an institution that one of the fellows is at. They will be invited to join this soon to be launched network. It'll definitely be launched by the time these start. So that the junior scholars would be non-fellows. Okay, I think that's everything on that. Let me go to the next slide. Okay, so for the eligibility for the research, it should address a very specific issue or research question that has clear policy and practice implications. I'm going to look over here. As far as the data, you can utilize existing data, either secondary get secondary data or administrative or program data from your partner, or you can collect original data. We want to be really clear, though, that no one knows what the COVID timeline or the COVID restrictions will be when these start. So you should assume in your proposal that those restrictions are still in place. What we don't want to see is a project that proposes doing, multiple focus groups indoors with people in, the second month of the project, when that is probably not, going to happen. The other important thing on this slide is the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation's priority populations. So preference will be given to projects that are looking at these populations. The first one is Native American, Alaskan Native, or Native Hawaiian communities. The second one is youth who are in or transitioning out of foster care. And the third is children, families, and communities experiencing disproportional historic and systemic inequities in the United States. In your proposal, especially around that third category, you should really explain how your project reflects that population, how it defines that population. Yeah, and then the other thing is just to make sure that your project is not just like rehashing something that's already been done or duplicating something that's already being done, but really adds additional value. All right, dissemination. This is the same as it was in the pilot round. The easy one is the one product for academic audiences, that a conference presentation, a journal article. Those are examples. That product, we do not expect for that to be completed in the 15 months, but your proposal should be really clear about what your plan is, including like what conference or what journal, and what the timeline would be for that past the 15 months. The two final products for a non-academic audience, I just want to say ahead of time, if you have specific questions about this, feel free to reach out to me, because it's going to sound maybe a little confusing. What we want to make sure of is that your partner agency or partner organization gets some sort of report. So let's say you are going to do a video training for home visitors as your main product, and that it can be for your partner, but it can also be viewed by other home visiting organizations. We still would want you to write a brief report to your partner agency that just kind of highlighted your research findings and your recommendations. If your main product will be to your partner organization, that you're writing a report or a call to action or something for your specific partner, then the product for the broader audience could be something much briefer, like an infographic or a 2-page brief or something like that. We do expect for those two to be completed in the 15-month project period. So again, reach out to me if you have questions about that. This is a focus of the Research to Action Grant projects, so you should be thoughtful about what your plan is for those two products. Okay, let me talk about expectations for meetings during the project period. There are three kind of categories. One are these virtual meetings. We'll have a kickoff meeting, a normal grantee kickoff meeting that talks about kind of a lot of administrative stuff, that go over the expectations. We also, this is new this year, we expect each team to meet with our communication staff at Chapin Hall to discuss your plans for dissemination. They are really amazing at helping you think through what might work, other considerations. So we expect each team to meet with them at the beginning of the the project period. We plan quarterly grantee calls. Those will be like 1-hour calls that we share challenges and accomplishments, and we talk through some of the issues that might have come up on your projects. And then the last thing are quarterly PI calls. These are new. They will be, I assume, pretty brief. They will be more focused on kind of administrative project management type conversations. We plan for, I'm going through this so fast, and so sorry. We plan 4 trainings. These will also be open. You all will be expected, the grantees will be expected to participate in these. These will also be open to the network members, and we'll have 4. They focus on project management, diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, translation and dissemination, and seeking additional funding, or kind of leveraging these projects to get additional funding. And the last one, the most exciting one, I think, is that we hope to be able to have an in-person Research to Action Grant Summit in 2023. That'll be in person, similar to our mid-year meetings that we've had in the past. And we will pay for up to 4 people from each of your project teams, the grantees project teams, to attend that meeting. Okay, grants management. Expectations. All right. Reports to Chapin Hall, you'll have to provide a brief progress report with a financial report halfway through, and then a brief final report with a final financial report. Pretty standard stuff. We do plan an evaluation of the grants program. We haven't finalized what that'll look like. Interviews or surveys for you all, the grantees to complete. And then the last thing is if you have major changes that need to be made to the project around, like you're changing staff, or you need to use a different data source or whatever, you need to let us know so that we are aware of that and we can approve that. Okay, so next I'm going to turn to writing the proposal. First, the most important, I assume, is the submission, the deadline. It's when I move that, I don't know if you guys are seeing that move or not. I should probably just leave it. Anyway, it's due on February 1st, Monday, February 1st. The proposals are due. You need to save the proposal as, I skipped my notes, hold on. As PDF documents and send them to the Doris, the DD Fellowships email address, just so that, because Mickey and I both have access to that email address so that we can get you confirmation of it within 24 hours. We will have a selection committee that reviews the proposals. We anticipate sending out questions to the finalists. And that will happen in probably late February or early March. We'll keep you posted on the timeline, but you will have an opportunity to answer some questions. Okay, the narrative, this is where the details for all of this, there's so many more details in that proposal requirement document. So please look there for all the specific details. I think we provide a lot of detail about what is expected in the narrative. Want to highlight that it's 10 pages. Please don't do any silly tricks about doing it single space and 8-point font. Any references that you include do not count toward the page limit. I really don't think we need to go through all of this. It's pretty standard. Describe your research, the project team and the roles, your project management plan, what data you plan to use, the analysis methodology, the IRB expectations, and how that'll work, and as well as the communications plan around the dissemination. The timeline, so that's a separate page limit. we want a one-page timeline chart, sort of like that nice little thing I found on the internet, and then a 2-page narrative of the timeline with kind of the big pieces. Yeah, so Joni's going to talk about this mostly, but there's a 1-page budget template that's already on the website for you all to use. And then we have a 2-page maximum budget narrative. It will, you know, you talk about the, personnel. Yeah, I'm really not going to go, Joni's going to go through this, so I'm not going to talk about it. Indirect rate is capped at 12%. That's what the foundation requires. Okay, the letters of support. You may have heard them called letters of commitment. I think that's probably a better phrase for it. We require at least 2. So one is from the principal investigators institution. We're assuming that's the fiscal agent. So we need one from the, you know, the fiscal agent that explains, you know, we know about this project, we support this project, we're qualified to complete this project, talk about the staff roles, and signed by an authorized individual. The policy or practice partner institution, we definitely need that. Talking about, again, their commitment to the project, the staff. We would like for that letter to include a backup plan. That was something that I think all 3 pilot projects experienced were major staff changes, either going on leave or leaving the organization. So in that letter, we'd like a backup plan for key staff. And then that should also talk about those specific engagement activities that they'll be engaged in during the grant period. If you have a sub-awardee, then which you will, because you have to have at least 2 fellows, so you'll have at least 1 person. We need a letter from that individual or from that organization that talks about the structure of the contract, the staff and their roles, their specific activities. And then the last one is if you are going to be using data from a different entity, you should have a letter of support from that organization or that entity that talks about the data, what the data sharing process is, and the commitment to that, as well as the timeline. We have examples of letters of support. We were gonna we'll try to post those on the fellowship website. You can also email me if you have questions or if you need them before we get them posted. Okay, I think I'm almost done with my part. CVs, we should include CVs for the fellows, the key partners, like any staff at your partner agency or organization, and the junior scholars. You should put those as one PDF and include everybody in alphabetical order. Okay, Joni, I'm gonna turn it over to you. I don't actually know if I know how to do that, but.
Hey, Leanne, I think I can just speak. I can, if you want me, I can just tell you when to shift through the slides.
That'd be great.
So, oh, it's an afternoon, sorry. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Joni Perlman. I work closely with Leanne. I'm the Director of Financial Operations at Chapin Hall. And I've been working closely with Leanne based on our goals for this program, as well as feedback from the first round we did this to try and streamline and make the budgeting process both a learning opportunity for everyone, but also not as stressful or, you know, to prohibit anybody from moving forward with the application, because I know budgeting can be a little bit, not scary is not the right word, but a little bit intimidating. So Leanne and I have partnered and we've developed actually a budget template that everyone will use to submit, to try and take that and make that easy for everyone. And within that budget template, I think that for the most part, everyone's going to focus on the personnel section. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. we've set up the budget template so that people can enter names in there, they can enter roles, they can enter hours, and you'll have to come up with a fringe rate that most likely you will get from your organization that's the recipient of the money. This first section here that Leanne's showing is the personnel section. And that's going to be for anybody who's an employee of the organization that is the recipient of the funds. So it's pretty straightforward. We've built in some calculations for everyone to calculate that. At the bottom of that, the indirect, you'll see no indirect at the top, and that will just all flow through in the calculation. So we hope that that part's a little bit easier. Where I think that there's areas that people will have questions about, and we're available for questions, I'm available, people from my team are available for questions, is that the bottom section on other direct costs. So I wanted to just say, at the top section again, staff salaries and your fringe rate from your organization are approved and allowable costs. The bottom section, the other direct costs, this should be things that you think you will need to complete the project. So we tried to put some prompters in to help you think about whether you need some transcription if you're conducting data collection, if you're going to have incentives. But what I want to spend the most time of my limited time is probably talking about the section between contractor and subrecipient, which you see at the bottom. Leanne mentioned that most people will, or you're required to work with, or people will be working together as part of the collaboration. For the most part, I expect that people will be using contractors. So as an example, if you're at institution A and you decide to partner with another fellow who's at institution B, that other fellow and their institution and how you contract with them will most likely fall under the contractor status. There are a few nuances as it relates to subrecipient and contractor. And I do want to stress that if you expect any of your payments to anybody to be over $25,000, that's really one of the deciding factors in how things are treated. I recommend that you reach out to me, Leanne. You can give them my information and I can help people navigate. I think for the purposes of this, we can label people as contractors, and if there is a larger sum being paid out, we can work with everybody one-on-one. So that first part is you complete this budget template and it will align with your budget. And then essentially the next piece is that you will complete the budget narrative, which is really just putting all of these numbers into words. It will talk about roles people have. If you have travel, it will talk about what you plan to travel and those types of things. And I think for anybody who's working on this, who's the lead, there will be one budget per team. And that will be submitted by the team that is at the organization that's submitting the proposal. As if you're working with collaborators or you're asking other people to participate, you could request budget documents. You should request budget documents for them, but we should only receive one budget document and one budget narrative. And from that budget narrative, Leanne and the committee who's reviewing this should actually be able to tell the whole story of where every penny is going to be spent. So that they know where staffing is going to be, what travel might be allowed, what your plans are for communications or any of those things. So I think that from and we put I think, Leanne, did we put a 2-page limit on the budget narrative?
That's right.
So I recommend that you do the budget and the budget narrative kind of side by side so that you can keep notes. We've given the instructions that are pretty detailed on what to include in the budget narrative, how to include that. I think the budget narrative should focus on the financial side, although you'll have some context about what external parties will be doing. A majority of the bulk of that will be in your proposal. So, keep that in mind. You don't have to be duplicative in what you say. What am I missing, Leanne?
Nothing, I don't think. We have the other slide if you want. I mean, I can just bring it up.
We should. Yeah, I think, I think based on our experience in working through this program before, I understand that for many of you, this might be your first time doing a budget or your first time leading a project like this. So we do have a slide around, there's a nuanced distinction between subrecipient and contractor. And we provided some resources to help you make that determination. Again, my recommendation is that one, if you have grants as support at your sponsoring organization, you could always talk to them about this. They should be well versed in that as well. But second, I think if you reach a threshold of $25,000 and what you're planning to spend to each individual contractor or third party, then reach out to us and we'll help you work through that as part of your application. I think that's the easiest option, Leanne.
Yep, I agree. I'll just let everyone know, I find this confusing. So Joni and Kristen are the Chapin Hall legal counsel. They try to help me, and so we can help any of you all talk through this. The main point that I want to make on top of what Joni has said is that in the pilot round, we limited you all to individual contractors. We want to make sure that, you know, we know that that cut some people out. And so we want it is possible for an organization to be a contractor or a subcontractor, but there are rules about how that has to work. So if you have questions about it, you should reach out and we can help you. So, okay, thanks, Joni. I appreciate it. I am gonna move us now. Let me let you all know, I know there are some questions, but we're going to get through Natalia and Judith first, and then I will, the rest of the time will be open to answering questions. We are right on time. So let me pass it to Natalia, and then and then we'll get to the questions.
Thanks, Leanne.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So actually, do I need to give kind of like I'll just give a very brief interview. My name is Natalia. I am a I'm part of like cohort 7, and I am finishing up my PhD in neuroscience at UCLA. I'm really just writing up my dissertation now, so I should be graduating anytime soon. Okay, so I wanted to share with you, some of this may be a little redundant to what Leanne was saying, but I just want to emphasize, especially on the lessons learned, the next slide, it will be kind of redundant, but it's just very important. So the process we went through in terms of like idea generation and partner identification, for us, it was actually a lot had to do with like timing and just capitalizing on like the great timing of the grant announcement. My colleague had recently, my colleague Scott Delaney, who is in the cohort 8, he recently attended a framework seminar that I'm pretty sure Dan Busso, who I want to say is in cohort 3, that he was speaking at. So then that put like frameworks in his mind, and then I was familiar with frameworks before, and then my colleague Scott also had semi-recently come into contact with the Public Defender Service, which was our community partner, essentially. And then him and I had ongoing discussions on just how to collaborate together on a research project. So we were already having these discussions and already had some ideas, and then the announcement came out, and so we were just like, oh my gosh, we have to apply, we have to capitalize on this. So that's why, as you'll probably see on the slide, there's just me talking about capitalizing a lot, but it was just a great, the timing was just great. And also each of us, so it was really myself, Scott, and Dan, we were all like the co-principal investigators, and we have overlapping strengths, but also unique strengths and skill sets, which were great for this project. You know, Dan is directly at Frameworks, has led focus groups, is used to, well, that's a little bit like specific to our project, but the focus groups bit is really important. The fact that he's led focus groups and is able to do that. Scott has a strong background in epidemiology, and then so while I've worked with really large data sets as well, he has that great statistical background. And then we all not only do we work in similar areas of research, I mean, I think most of us that are part of, you know, the Doris Dukes like fellowship, we all work in like loosely similar areas of research, but we, us three, our passions were very much aligned. So it was just like a great team to put together. And then we, I know like Leanne mentioned this before, you can either collect data or have access to like a secondary data set. So I have access to a really large longitudinal data set, same with Scott. And this was like, we have existing access. So there wasn't going to be any time spent / wasted having to gain access. And then the little bit that I included, the italicized bit, that's just because you all may be saying like, what project is she even talking about? So we, in a nutshell, our project was to utilize the insights we gained from our neurodevelopmental research findings, you know, working with frameworks to advance our community partners' advocacy efforts, and then to also help them conduct like internal trainings. And let's see, I kind of touched on the partner identification. We did have an existing but developing relationship with both frameworks and the Public Defender Service. So something that I heard Leanne speak about a little bit earlier is if you haven't worked with these partners on a project before, to really emphasize like that bit. So I think that that is very important, because this was our first time actually working with Public Defender Service and frameworks. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a slide, I know that there are far less words, but I could talk at great length on this slide, so if anyone has any questions. And a lot of this is really reinforcing what Leanne said, which I didn't know she was going to say everything that she did, but there really is a lot of overlap. Really specifying the range of responsibilities that each member will uniquely contribute to when writing the proposal. That's very important. Definitely the contingency plans. I mean, as we all know, like life is unexpected and things change. And, you know, in our project, one of our main contact / partner at the Public Defender Service was there with us when we were writing the proposal, and then kind of right at the beginning, and then she left the Public Defender Service and then went into academia. And so although we ended up working clearly with other people at the Public Defender Service, her passion wasn't like directly transferred over to them. So we had to kind of like start from the ground up with that, with kind of like really getting the other team members excited and you know, invested in the project. So I do think it's really important to have at least a few people who are equally as passionate about the project, you know, at the community partnership that you're working with. Remain flexible and deliverable focused. I can always talk about that later. I'm not sure if Leanne talked about this before, but I think it could be helpful to include the percentage of effort breakdown for responsibilities. So say when you were talking about the range of responsibilities each person will be responsible for or contribute towards, let's say it's like 30% administrative, and then include what that means. 20% you know, research efforts, whether it has to be like analyzing data, collecting data, and then explain what that means. And then I think that would be helpful. That would have been helpful for our project too, just to kind of make sure we're staying in track and online with everything. And yes, I did talk about the last one, which is expand the community partnership to include multiple collaborators, and also think long-term, instead of just, you know, you're working with these partners just for this project, kind of how can I continue to work with these like partners, you know, on existing projects or, you know, on future projects. So that is essentially everything. Sorry, I rushed through that very quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much, Natalia. You guys really did. Like I said, everybody, I think all the projects had somebody pretty key depart during their project. Judith can talk, I'll introduce Judith in a second. I think hers was sort of maybe the easiest transition, but Yeah, so that's why we want a contingency plan in the letter. It'll be good to have that. So, all right, thank you. I am going to move to Judith now. Judith, I should have said this with Natalia. For those of you who don't know, but both of them were obviously recipients of the pilot funding for the Research to Action grant. So Judith, you go ahead and talk about your project.
Okay, so Judith Scott, I'm in cohort 5, and I actually also did this with 2 people from 2 other cohorts, from Julia Fleckman, who's in cohort 6, and Bridget Cho from cohort 7. We're also involved in collaborating on this. So just so you know, or generally our project focused on examining parenting behavior and contextual influences on that parenting behavior among Chinese immigrant families in the greater Boston area, with a focus on really understanding, possible links to child maltreatment. So I was in an enviable position. I had already been establishing a relationship with my community partner. And I will admit, from the beginning, I had an evaluation. I secretly hoped they wanted to work with me in some way. And luckily, it did work out that our relationship was one where we had mutual respect and an interest in each other. But the way the idea came about is in this evaluation process where we were looking and interviewing management and leadership about what their agency does, what programs they have, how effective they are, and what makes them unique to their agency. What really came up is this attention to culture and understanding, how culture really affects parenting among Chinese parents. And they started telling and sharing these stories about interactions with DCF that they had, because I didn't know they had a DCF contract until later, in which they're really providing parenting support classes for Chinese immigrant parents. And what we were talking about as we discussed it more is that there was really not much research that provided support for what they were doing. And so when they were applying for funding or trying to advocate for their community, people would keep asking them, like, well, where are you basing this information from? Who are these experts that you're quoting? As unfortunately not recognizing that they were the experts, right? They knew exactly what they've been doing. This agency's been in this community for 40 years. Actually, probably just 50 because they just had their 50th anniversary. So in these discussions with management and staff, we kind of realized that on top of that, this phenomenon in which there were an increase in Chinese immigrant families engaging in DCF was not really being discussed or documented. Like, I couldn't find anything about it. And so we really wanted to understand it more as to how do Chinese immigrant families approach parenting. So this conversation got even more in depth because we were doing logic model trainings with the staff so that they could develop one for each of their programs. And that meant I got to talk to staff members as well as management. And this theme kept coming about the invisibility of data on Chinese immigrant families and this need to do this. So luckily, at the time the grant came out, they decided to approach me about possible research projects. It was like the perfect timing in the world, where the executive director at that time contacted me. We had a meeting, and he was like, "Hey, we think we want to do some research with you." And I'm like, "Really?" Because this grant just came out, and I think it's a perfect fit for what we've been talking about. So I don't think it always works out that way, but I got really fortunate. And I think for me, the key was that we had an existing relationship for the last 2 years. So I was in a good position, which I think it's definitely harder to start from a new relationship. So what ended up from that is that there were a series of meetings that occurred immediately were occurring with people who could be part of the process. So Julia and Bridget were in that meetings, as well as I already had a current RA in there who ended up being on the project. And we just started talking about whether this grant is a fit, what's the idea, and what role could they really do? Like, what does this mean for them? What is their capacity? As we know that every nonprofit, right, is always over the top. So do they have people to help us with translation, for example, of materials? We would need childcare. Is that possible that there are people there who are trained in childcare could actually do that? And luckily, we were able to kind of get to a point where we realized that their role, a mutual agreement on their role. And one of the key things that we thought about was, what does it mean for a service organization to be conducting research on their potential and clients, right? There is some possibility of feeling coerced, right? Like, I have to participate in the study in order to get these services, right? This awareness that that relationship can in some way cloud the research perspective, right? Like it's just like, oh, I interact with you on the surface level, so I'm going to try to talk to you there. So for that reason, they weren't involved in data collection because we kind of realized that that would be kind of a conflicting issue with them being a service provider. So this is how we kind of have these conversations about role and what needed to be the case. Next slide. So as soon as I got the email from Leanne, the first thing I did was actually email Julie and Bridget and said, hey, are you interested, right? So from the beginning, it was really important for me to find other fellows that I felt could be interested in this work, that had some interest in it, some overlap. And so we didn't even necessarily first float this idea. We actually floated each other's ideas, like which ideas from each institution would be the best fit. And it turns out that mine was. So it could have been that we had a completely different situation and maybe got the grant for something completely different. But that was really important to establish, you know, who's going to be leading this grant, which idea will work for best for us, how are our institution's IRBs functioning, because in the end, it turned out that like my IRB at my institution was a lot faster and more responsive. Let's say at the time, when Julie was at Tulane, Tulane's was a very different situation altogether. And there was much more support. So I had a grant person at my school who was able to be on my grant, which was definitely a plus for helping me kind of administer and deal with the financial aspects of this. On top of that, I love to find people who could be on my grant. And so I was immediately, as I got the grant, I started putting feelers out with students, and which led me to actually some community members who are now on my research team. So I was aware of this is a good deal of money, but it's not a lot to pay everyone. So I really wanted to find students or potential junior scholars who were interested in engaging on this research and had some expertise, which is how I ended up with the research team for the study. And actually, they're still my research team as we're thinking about working on another study. But it was great to talk to them also to make sure that the ideas that I was having, because they were representative of the community, made sense to them, right? Because we have these ideas in our head, but what if the average person or student has no clue what you're talking about? So it was really beneficial to have these different meetings with them, as well as reviewing their CVs and having them see the grant RFP to really understand what was going on. I want to also highlight that like I was a newbie on grant applying when I did this. Like I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. So luckily, like Julia actually has a lot of grant expertise, and so she was sharing all of our AIMS pages to really help me and us think about that. So we spent a lot of time, the three of us, really working on this AIMS page and then sharing it with our community partner to make sure that this is something that was a fit for them and for us. And it became also the basis for having conversations for potential research team membership. So as soon as you can, like that AIM page, if you're not familiar, is like the key to every grant, and really focus on that. As we were running this grant, we also kept meeting with our community partners because, you know, sometimes we're not sure about an answer. We're not sure if the applicability that we see for practice and policy is what they see for that. You know, what do they think they're going to get out of this is really important. And on my end, I had one where I did actually pay my community partner. So it was a discussion about like what's adequate. Like obviously I'm not going to give them something that's insulting. What's adequate, what's feasible for this grant? How can we make sure that people are getting compensated for their work? Because in the end, they did quite a lot of work on our grant. And so I'm kind of happy they got some money for that. Feedback regarding the narrative in general, as I said, from the community partner was key for thinking about the implications and practice and policy implications. And what we really found actually is that because they were able to see a lot of our work, it helped them in developing their letter of support, right? Because they were able to see the process of where we were actually going. So I suggest if you can, that would be great. We actually use Google Docs for the whole team so they could easily access what was going on. Start the budget narrative early because I had a situation where we thought we had a quote for transcribing and transcription, and it was completely inaccurate, and it went up by like $5,000, which meant that within a certain period of time, we were having to immediately adjust the budget and cut and see what's actually be in place. I will definitely emphasize the whole contingency plans things. Obviously, we couldn't have prepared for COVID, but in terms of staffing requirements and changes, we actually had the executive director of our agency leave, Luckily, we had already had a second person who was actually second to him, who was already engaged. So we did have definitely a smooth transition, but it was a huge adjustment because, he's the one that I originally had the relationship with that developed. And luckily now the new executive director is like very happy to work with us and will continue to do that. But we couldn't have anticipated that. That was a huge thing. He had been there for 13 years. We didn't see that coming. So make sure to kind of think about that. And also contingency plans for recruitment is a big one. And also for if you are doing any kind of transcription or translation, we had a situation where the company that we hired wasn't good. So we had to completely rehaul and create our own protocol and take on the transcription and transcribing ourselves, which we hadn't anticipated. And luckily we were able to do it, but it definitely set us back a bit on our timeline. I think those are all my lessons learned.
Thank you so much, Judith. I appreciate you sharing your lessons learned with us. Let me go. Okay, so that is the end of the formal presentation. I am going to read and answer the questions that we have gotten in the question box. And then so you can keep typing them in. If you want to like verbally ask a question, I think there's a way you can like raise your hand. And then after I finish these, we can ask, you can unmute yourself and ask it. But let me go through these first. Sorry, it just like that little tiny box just closed. The fiscal agents, they do have to be a nonprofit organization or like an institute of higher education. So that's one question that we got. Another one is, can we work with a small group of practice or policy partners? And an example would be like, multiple childcare providers or multiple early Head Start or Head Starts in a state. I don't think that we've had that question before, but so my preliminary answer would be yes. I think that you should be really thoughtful about the time it would take to do that. If they're already in some kind of like a collaborative or something that they meet regularly and talk regularly so that you could kind of be engaged with one entity where they all partnered, then that probably would be best. But there's no, I don't think there would be any reason that the answer would be no to that. But for the person who asked that, if you want to follow up with me on email, then I can think about it a little more and get you a better answer. Okay, we've gotten a couple questions about the junior scholars. So let me back up and say, in the pilot round, the junior scholar was very undefined, and that included fellows. In this round, we do not want the junior scholar to be fellows. So when we call them a junior scholar, that is a pretty broad category. The most common scenario is that they are a student at the institution or a postdoc or something. If you are at a place like Chapin Hall, like a non-academic institution, for example, my job title is researcher, or we have senior researchers. A junior scholar would be somebody who was like an associate researcher, or somebody who just was getting their PhD or who had just finished their master's program, something like that. It's not a strict definition, but it doesn't have, there's nothing around tenure. The PI can be untenured, have tenure, either way. The PI should be a fellow, just like in the pilot round. The PI cannot be a senior person like that you're working under. A fellow needs to be the PI. The junior scholar, yes, they can be a student trainee at the policy or practice organization. So yes, is the answer to that. One more thing about the junior scholar. Remember that they will be invited to join the Child Wellbeing Research Network, which hopefully you all are very familiar with by now from our video or town hall. If you need more information on that, reach out and I can provide it to you. But we want these junior scholars to begin to be a part of this network so that we can expand the fellowship network. Let's see, do fellows need to be at 2 separate institutions, or can they both be at the same institution working in different disciplines? Yes, they can be at the same institution. They just need to be in, you need to have different disciplines. Somebody said that they don't have a question, but they really appreciated hearing from Natalia and Judith about lessons learned. So thanks again to both of you for being on here. There's a question on here about whether the other fellow would be a sub-recipient. So again, my suggestion around whether someone's a sub-recipient or a contractor would be to reach out and talk to us. I, again, find it super confusing. I think my estimate is that most people that you work with will be a contractor, not a subcontractor, but we should talk through that just to make sure that we have it. Joni and Kristen can talk about, there's a lot of like sort of legal things and financial things that we have to make sure we're getting right about whether you're designated as one or the other. So just reach out and ask us specifically about your project. Here's a question. What if your organization will be both the practice partner and the sub awardee? Do we just need one letter? Oh, I see. That just took me a minute. Yeah, I think you would just need one letter. I would just be really clear about addressing the things that you would include in 2 separate letters, just address in one. And then does the travel funding for the 2023 summit need to be included in the grant budget? No, we don't want you to include it. We have included it in ours. Like I said, for up to 4 people from each team. We plan on that summit also, it'll be in person, but we also plan on having it, being able to participate virtually. I know like for policy or practice partners, my guess is would not be interested in like the whole thing, but might be interested obviously in the presentation. We will ask all the teams to present their findings at the summit. So the partner can come or they can participate virtually, but you shouldn't include travel for that in your budget. We have it. Okay, so those are all of the written questions that I have. Mickey, I don't know if there are, if anybody has raised their hand. I can't see that on here, but if anybody has a question that they want to ask verbally.
There are no hands raised as of now.
Okay. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Okay. There is one other, okay. I think that's everything. So I think we'll end. Remember, please, please, please try to send your questions to the DD Fellowships email, not just to me. You can copy me, but we're trying to track them all because then what we answer, we'll put in the FAQ if it's, applicable to people other than just you. We'll add it to the FAQ. So feel free to reach out with questions and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. Thank you, everybody, and look forward to getting lots of proposals. All right, bye.